The first sign appeared above the Pacific Ocean just before sunrise. At first, people thought it was some kind of strange weather event. A massive shadow spread across the clouds, so large it covered the horizon itself. Ships stopped moving. Planes changed direction. Satellites began failing one after another without explanation. Within minutes, every country on Earth was trying to understand the same terrifying thing. Something enormous had entered orbit. Across cities around the world, people walked into streets staring at the sky. Phones streamed shaky videos showing gigantic black structures floating silently above the planet. They were too large to be spacecraft in the normal sense. Each one looked like an entire city built from dark metal, surrounded by glowing rings of blue light that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. No engines burned. No sound came from them. They simply appeared. Military forces across the world went on full alert. Fighter jets launched from carriers. Missile systems powered online. Underground bunkers opened for the first time in decades. Yet no one fired. Nobody knew what would happen if they did. Then every screen on Earth suddenly went black. Televisions stopped mid-broadcast. Phones froze. Digital billboards shut down. For 3 long seconds, the entire world sat in silence. After that, a single symbol appeared on every screen. A silver circle surrounded by strange markings no human recognized. Beneath it, words slowly translated themselves into every known language on Earth. People of Earth. You are now under the authority of the Imperial Dominion. Surrender peacefully. Resistance will result in extinction. Panic spread instantly. In some cities, crowds flooded stores searching for supplies. Roads jammed with traffic as families tried leaving major population centers. Religious gatherings filled overnight. Financial systems crashed within hours. Some governments attempted to calm people while others openly prepared for war. But the fear became worse after the second transmission arrived. This time, an actual figure appeared on screen. The being sat on a massive throne surrounded by glowing red banners. Its face was pale and narrow, with dark eyes that barely blinked. Heavy armor covered its body, marked with symbols no one understood. Behind the throne stood rows of silent soldiers holding long metallic weapons. The alien ruler stared directly into the camera as if looking at every human alive. For thousands of years, the translated voice said calmly, "Your species has polluted this region of space with violence, conflict, and instability. Your world is primitive. Your governments are divided. Your survival serves no purpose." The figure leaned forward slightly. "You have one opportunity to avoid destruction. Submit to imperial rule before your next planetary rotation ends." Then the transmission ended. Just like that, around the world, fear turned into disbelief. Humanity had spent centuries wondering if aliens existed. Now the answer had arrived with warships large enough to darken the sky. Inside a deep underground monitoring station beneath northern Europe, one man kept staring at the frozen transmission long after everyone else left the room. He had spent most of his life working with deep space communication systems before retiring years earlier. Quiet by nature, he trusted patterns more than people. During his career, he helped analyze strange signals from distant space probes and military satellites. Most turned out to be equipment failures or natural interference. But this signal felt wrong. Not the message itself. Something underneath it. He replayed the transmission again, slowing the audio layer frame by frame. Hidden beneath the translated speech was another sound almost impossible to notice. A repeating pulse buried deep in the frequency. His eyes narrowed. He checked it again. Then again. The pulse repeated every 7 seconds. A warning code. An old one. His hands slowly tightened around the console. Decades earlier, while working on classified military projects, he had seen that exact signal hidden inside damaged transmissions recovered near deep space. Back then, nobody could explain it. The files were sealed almost immediately afterward. He thought he would never hear it again. Yet here it was, hidden beneath the voice of an alien emperor threatening Earth. A younger technician noticed his expression. "You okay?" He hesitated before answering. "That signal," he whispered. "It's not theirs. The technician frowned. What do you mean? He didn't answer immediately. His mind was already moving through memories he had spent years trying to forget. Old recordings, disappearing ships, missing reports, and one classified word mentioned only once before entire files vanished from military archives. The void. Above Earth, the alien fleet slowly repositioned itself. Hundreds of smaller warships emerged from the giant structures hanging over the planet. News stations tracked them moving silently across orbit like predators circling prey. No attacks came. Not yet. That somehow made it worse. People waited in fear, watching the countdown toward the Empire's deadline spread across every broadcast station on Earth. 20 hours remained. In Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, and dozens of other capitals, emergency meetings continued without pause. Military experts admitted the truth quickly. Humanity had no realistic chance in direct combat. The alien ships were simply too advanced. Some leaders demanded surrender negotiations. Others refused completely. Arguments erupted everywhere. Meanwhile, the former signal officer sat alone in a dark apartment surrounded by old storage drives and sealed paper files. Rain tapped softly against the windows while city sirens echoed far below. He inserted an old data chip into a portable reader. Most of the files were corrupted from age, but one video still worked. The footage showed grainy images from a deep space observation station recorded over 40 years earlier. Scientists argued nervously while alarms sounded in the background. Then the camera turned toward space. A massive distortion twisted among distant stars like dark water rippling across reality itself. Around it floated several damaged human warships drifting without power. The recording cut suddenly as someone shouted one sentence. "Close the channel before it hears us." Static filled the screen. The file ended. He sat motionless for several seconds. Then he opened another archive. This one contained fragments of military reports mentioning missing exploration fleets that vanished near unexplored sectors beyond Pluto generations earlier. Officially, the missions were called navigation failures. But hidden notes painted a different story. The ships had reported impossible readings before disappearing. Distorted time signals. Voices inside dead communication channels. And dark energy formations surrounding a region they nicknamed the Void. Every report ended the same way. Signal lost. No survivors found. He leaned back slowly, realizing something terrifying. The warning code hidden inside the alien transmission was identical to the emergency signals sent by those missing fleets. Which meant one thing. The alien empire already knew about the Void. Outside, thunder rolled across the city as emergency broadcasts warned citizens to remain indoors. Fighter jets screamed overhead toward the coast. Everywhere, fear spread faster than any government could control. Hours passed. Then Earth's long-range satellites detected movement near the edge of the solar system. At first, astronomers believed the sensors were malfunctioning. Multiple stations reported massive gravitational distortions appearing beyond Pluto. Entire sectors of deep space suddenly became unreadable. One scientist compared it to reality itself bending apart. News spread quickly through military channels. The alien fleet reacted immediately. Several giant warships turned away from Earth and repositioned toward deep space as if responding to an approaching threat. That frightened military commanders more than anything else so far. The Empire was afraid of something. Inside the underground monitoring station, alarms began flashing across every screen. Operators shouted coordinates while radar systems struggled to lock onto incoming readings. The former signal officer stared silently at the data appearing before him. Energy spikes. Massive ones. Exactly like the old classified recordings. One technician looked pale. "Sir, something's opening out there." Deep beyond Pluto, space itself slowly began to tear apart. At first it appeared as a thin black crack stretching across the stars. Then the crack widened into a swirling darkness so enormous it swallowed nearby light. Purple energy flashed along its edges while distorted waves rolled through surrounding space. Even from impossible distances, telescopes captured the terrifying scale of it. The void had opened. For several seconds, nobody spoke inside the control room. Then one operator whispered, "Dear God!" Shapes moved inside the darkness. Huge shapes. Not stars. Not planets. Ships. The alien empire immediately deployed dozens of warships toward the anomaly. Bright engine trails cut across the blackness of space while defensive formations formed around Earth. But the approaching objects kept coming. Slowly. Silently. The officer felt cold fear settle deep in his chest because he already understood something the others did not. Those ships were not alien. Ancient signals suddenly flooded every communication channel across the station. Most were distorted beyond recognition, filled with static and strange echoes. But one message came through clearly. A human voice, old, tired, warning them. They opened it again. The voice whispered weakly through static. After all this time, the transmission crackled violently. Then the final words reached Earth. Run. The control room stayed silent long after the transmission ended. Nobody moved. The final words still echoed through the speakers like a warning from a ghost. Run. Operators stared at their screens while deep space scanners struggled to process what was happening beyond Pluto. The black rupture hanging in space continued growing larger every minute. Purple waves rolled around its edges like storms moving across an ocean of darkness. And inside it, shapes continued emerging. Huge warships. Human warships. The former signal officer stood frozen beside the central console while military personnel rushed around him. Some demanded answers. Others argued over whether the transmission could be fake. But deep down, everyone already understood the truth. Something impossible had returned. One of the younger officers finally looked toward him. "You know something about this, don't you?" He hesitated. For years, he had stayed quiet about the classified projects he once worked on. Most of those records were buried so deeply that even governments barely acknowledged they existed anymore. But now there was no point hiding it. "They were never lost," he said quietly. The room turned toward him. "What?" He took a slow breath before answering. "Those fleets that vanished decades ago." The official reports claimed navigation failures. But that wasn't true. They disappeared near a region of unstable space beyond the edge of explored territory. "The void," one technician whispered. He nodded once. The room grew colder somehow. Before anyone could ask another question, armed security personnel entered the station. Their expressions were tense and serious. Without explanation, they ordered the signal officer to come with them immediately. No one argued. Outside, the world was collapsing into fear. Major cities remained crowded with people trying to flee while emergency alerts played nonstop across every channel. Grocery stores stood empty. Gas stations ran dry. Families gathered inside subway tunnels, underground parking structures, and old shelters built during earlier wars. Above them all, the alien fleet remained motionless in orbit. Watching. In several countries, protests had already turned violent. Some demanded surrender to save humanity. Others wanted governments to launch nuclear weapons before the aliens attacked first. But the terrifying truth was becoming obvious. Earth could not win. The signal officer was transported through dark underground tunnels beneath military checkpoints and reinforced blast doors. Hours later, he arrived at a classified facility buried deep inside a mountain range far from any city. The place looked old. Not abandoned, but forgotten. Dust covered many of the hallways. Some equipment appeared decades out of date. Yet the security around it was stronger than anything he had seen during his years in government service. An elderly woman wearing a dark military uniform waited for him inside a briefing chamber. Her face looked exhausted, like someone who had not slept in days. "You recognized the warning signal," she said immediately. "Yes. We hoped nobody still alive would." She activated a large screen behind her. Old images filled the wall. Human colonies, warships, burning planets. Then came footage of massive battles taking place deep in space. He stared silently. Most people on Earth believed humanity's space exploration had remained peaceful. Small research stations, mining colonies, scientific missions. The reality had been very different. Centuries earlier, after humanity spread beyond Earth, Powerful factions fought brutal wars across distant systems. Entire fleets were built to control resources and territory among the stars. One group became especially dangerous: the Vanguard Armada. They were humanity's strongest deep space fleet, created near the end of those conflicts. Their ships carried experimental weapons so destructive that governments feared they could wipe out entire worlds. "The wars nearly destroyed us," the woman explained quietly. "So the surviving nations erased most of the records. Humanity returned its focus to Earth while deep space military programs were buried." She changed the image again. A dark region of space appeared on screen. The void. Then exploration fleets discovered this anomaly beyond Pluto. The footage showed strange energy waves surrounding an endless black distortion floating between the stars. Several ships drifted nearby for scale, looking tiny beside it. At first, scientists believed it was a rare spatial fracture, but ships operating near it began reporting impossible things. The next images showed damaged vessels and terrified crews. Time distortions, voices inside dead communication channels, sensor readings that made no sense. Some crews claimed they saw shapes moving inside the darkness. The signal officer remained silent because he already knew what came next. The Vanguard Armada was sent to investigate. The room grew quiet. They never returned. For decades, governments told the public the fleet was destroyed in a reactor accident during deep space testing. The truth stayed hidden behind classified archives and sealed military records. But now those lost ships were coming back. And nobody knew why. The woman zoomed the screen closer toward recent scanner readings from beyond Pluto. Hundreds of vessel signatures emerged slowly from inside the expanding rupture. "Those ships have been missing for nearly 200 years, she said. He stared at the readings carefully. "No," he answered softly. "Not for them." She looked confused. He pointed toward the distortion waves surrounding the anomaly. "Time doesn't move normally inside the void." Silence filled the room again. Outside the facility, alarms suddenly began echoing through the halls. Officers rushed past the chamber while emergency lights flashed red overhead. The alien empire had started moving. Large sections of the Imperial fleet descended into lower orbit above Earth's military installations. Giant ships positioned themselves over naval bases, missile silos, and satellite control centers. Then the Emperor appeared again across every screen worldwide. This time the calmness was gone from his face. "You were warned," the translated voice said coldly. "Your refusal to surrender leaves us no choice." Behind him, holographic maps showed Earth surrounded by Imperial warships. "You will submit now." Seconds later, explosions lit up the skies above several oceans. The attacks were precise. Orbital weapons struck isolated military targets instead of cities. Runways vanished beneath pillars of fire. Defense satellites disappeared one after another. Coastal bases lost power instantly. The Empire was demonstrating its strength. Humanity's response barely slowed them. Missiles launched from hidden silos never reached orbit. Fighter squadrons vanished from radar moments after engaging enemy ships. Communication networks collapsed across entire regions. Fear spread faster than the destruction itself. In crowded shelters, people held onto each other while distant tremors shook the ground. Parents tried calming terrified children. Emergency workers continued helping strangers despite knowing there might be no safety anywhere left on Earth. Inside the mountain facility, military leaders argued desperately about surrender terms. Then every screen in the command center suddenly flickered. One operator shouted, "Long-range sensors detecting new contacts." The room instantly focused on the main display. Beyond Pluto, the black rupture expanded violently. Massive energy waves rolled outward across the solar system, knocking several satellites offline. The strange ships emerging from the void became clearer now. There were thousands of them. Some looked heavily damaged, covered in scars and dark burn marks. Others were so large they dwarfed the alien warships surrounding Earth. And every single one carried ancient human military markings. A young analyst looked pale. "That's impossible." Then another officer spoke quietly. The Empire's changing formation. Everyone looked back toward orbital tracking data. The alien fleet was retreating from Earth. Not fully, but enough to create defensive lines facing deep space instead. The Emperor had stopped threatening humanity. Now he was preparing for war against something else. The signal officer felt his stomach tighten. He remembered old classified recordings from decades earlier. Scientists whispering in fear. Damaged crews begging to abandon the anomaly before it spread. They had never feared the lost human fleets themselves. They feared what might follow them out. Suddenly, every communication channel inside the facility exploded with static. Strange, distorted sounds echoed across the speakers like distant voices speaking underwater. Technicians struggled to stabilize the signal. Then a transmission finally broke through. A human face appeared briefly on screen. The man looked old and exhausted. Deep scars covered one side of his face. Behind him, red emergency lights flashed across a dark metallic bridge filled with damaged equipment. For a moment, nobody in the room breathed. The uniform he wore belonged to the Vanguard Armada. The Lost Fleet. The transmission crackled badly as the man stared directly into the camera. "If this reaches Earth," he said weakly. "Listen carefully." Static interrupted him. "We tried to contain it." The image distorted violently. Behind the man, something moved in the darkness of the bridge corridor. Tall, thin, wrong somehow. The crewman noticed it too. Fear crossed his face instantly. "They know the way out now," he whispered. The transmission nearly collapsed completely before one final sentence came through. "Do not let them reach Earth." The screen went black. Inside the command center, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then deep space alarms screamed across every system simultaneously. More objects were appearing inside the void. But these were different. They were not ships. Nobody in the command center understood what they were looking at. The new objects emerging inside the void did not resemble ships, stations, or anything built by intelligent life. Long shapes moved slowly beneath the dark energy storms like shadows beneath frozen water. Some appeared larger than moons. Others flickered in and out of existence as if reality itself struggled to hold their form together. Every sensor reading became unstable near them. One operator suddenly ripped off his headset, breathing hard. "I can hear voices," he whispered. Another technician stared at him in confusion. "What?" "The signal. There are voices inside it." Before anyone could respond, military alarms echoed through the underground facility again. The alien empire had launched its fleet toward deep space. Thousands of Imperial warships accelerated away from Earth in massive formations, surrounding the growing rupture near Pluto. For the first time since arriving in the solar system, the Empire no longer seemed focused on conquering humanity. Now they were afraid. The former signal officer watched the battle formations appear across tactical displays. Even from unimaginable distances, the scale of it felt overwhelming. Entire fleets filled the darkness between planets like moving continents of metal and light. Then the first shot was fired. A beam of white energy crossed millions of kilometers almost instantly and struck one of the emerging human ships near the void. The impact should have destroyed it. Instead, the ancient vessel barely slowed down. Gasps spread through the command center. Several more Imperial weapons fired together, bright enough to appear visible from Earth's night sky like artificial stars flashing across space. Again, the old human warship survived. And then it answered. A dark pulse expanded outward from the vessel's hull. No explosion followed. No dramatic fireball. The nearest alien destroyers simply vanished. Entire ships disappeared from every sensor at once, erased so completely that even debris failed to remain behind. Silence fell across the room. One military analyst leaned closer toward the screen. "What kind of weapon does that?" Nobody answered. The ancient fleet continued emerging from the void slowly and steadily. Hundreds of enormous black warships crossed the edge of the anomaly while purple storms rolled around them. Their hulls were scarred from countless battles. Some sections still burned with strange blue fires that never faded. They looked less like a fleet returning home and more like survivors crawling out of hell itself. On Earth, Billions of people watched the battle unfold through emergency broadcasts. Fear mixed with confusion as humanity realized the impossible truth. Those ships were human. The markings were old but recognizable. Ancient Earth military insignias stretched across dark armored hulls larger than modern cities. The lost Armada had returned. The alien empire attacked harder. Massive formations surrounded the incoming fleet while energy weapons lit up deep space continuously. Explosions flashed around Pluto like distant storms. But the returning Armada moved with terrifying precision. Every maneuver felt cold and calculated. Every shot destroyed multiple enemy ships at once. The signal officer watched carefully, noticing something disturbing. The ancient human fleet never wasted firepower. They attacked like soldiers who had spent years fighting enemies far deadlier than the Empire itself. Then a transmission reached Earth directly from the flagship emerging at the center of the Armada. Unlike the earlier broken messages, this signal was perfectly stable. A man appeared on screen. He looked older than anyone expected. Deep lines covered his face. One eye had been replaced with a dark mechanical implant glowing faintly beneath the bridge lights behind him. Heavy scars crossed his neck and hands. But what unsettled people most was his expression. He looked tired beyond words. Not frightened. Not angry. Exhausted. For several seconds, he simply stared silently into the camera, as if struggling to recognize the world he had returned to. Then he finally spoke. How long? The governments monitoring the signal exchanged confused looks. One official answered carefully. Approximately 217 years since the Vanguard Armada disappeared. The man closed his eyes slowly. Somewhere behind him, crew members lowered their heads quietly. When he looked forward again, the exhaustion in his face seemed even heavier. For us, he said softly, it has only been 31. The room fell silent again. Time inside the void moved differently. For Earth, generations had passed. For the lost fleets, only decades of endless war had gone by. Before anyone could ask questions, warning sirens erupted across the bridge behind the commander. Crew members rushed between stations while distant impacts shook the massive ship. One officer shouted, "Imperial reinforcements approaching Sector 7. The commander barely reacted. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the screen. You need to listen carefully, he said. The Empire was never your greatest threat. Deep behind his flagship, the darkness inside the void shifted again. Huge shapes moved beneath the storms. The commander noticed Earth's reaction immediately. They followed us, he continued quietly. The signal officer felt cold dread settle inside him. How many? He asked. The commander gave a weak, humorless smile. You still think numbers matter. Suddenly the transmission distorted briefly as strange sounds echoed through the channel. Whispers. Hundreds of them layered together beneath the static. Several technicians inside Earth's command center backed away from their stations uneasily. The commander heard it too. His face hardened instantly. They're getting closer. The connection ended without warning. Back near Pluto, the battle intensified. Imperial warships surrounded sections of the returning human fleet in desperate attempts to slow them down. But the Armada cut through enemy formations effortlessly. Some human ships released clouds of dark drones that sliced directly through armored hulls. Others used gravitational weapons that crushed entire formations inward before they exploded. Humanity watched in shock. The empire that had terrified Earth only hours earlier was losing badly. And yet the returning Armada still seemed unconcerned with victory. They kept moving away from the alien fleet, away from Earth, toward the expanding rupture, as if trying to contain something. Inside the underground command facility, arguments broke out among military leaders. Some believed the ancient fleet intended to take control of Earth once the Empire was defeated. Others argued they should attempt communication immediately. The signal officer remained focused on sensor readings from the void itself. Something was changing. Energy levels inside the anomaly were increasing rapidly. Strange waves spread through nearby space, interfering with communication systems across the solar system. Then civilian reports started arriving from Earth. people hearing voices through dead phones, television screens turning on by themselves, children describing strange dreams about dark oceans filled with stars. Most officials dismissed the reports as panic caused by stress and fear. The signal officer did not. He remembered the old files. Exposure symptoms. The same things happened to earlier exploration crews near the void. One technician suddenly shouted from across the room. New contacts. Everyone turned toward the main display. The objects inside the anomaly were moving faster now. For the first time, clear images appeared through the distortion. The room became completely silent. The shapes looked alive. Long black structures twisted through the darkness with movements too smooth to be mechanical. Faint glowing patterns spread across their surfaces like veins beneath skin. Some possessed massive circular openings filled with rotating light. Others simply looked wrong in ways the human mind struggled to understand. One analyst quietly stepped away from the screen and sat down without speaking. Another crossed himself under his breath. The signal officer stared at the readings with growing horror. Those things were not ships built by another civilization. They were something else entirely. Then Earth received another transmission from the Vanguard flagship. This time the commander's face looked grim. The Empire awakened them when they entered your system, he said immediately. The energy from their arrival destabilized the containment fields surrounding the void. One government official demanded answers. What are those things? The commander stayed silent for a moment. Finally, he answered. We never found a real name for them. Behind him, distant alarms continued echoing across the bridge. We only know what happens when they spread. The screen changed briefly, showing old battle footage recorded inside the void. Human ships drifting lifelessly. Entire stations abandoned. Dark shapes moving slowly through destroyed corridors. The footage cut suddenly before anything became fully visible. The commander looked directly toward the camera again. For 31 years we fought to keep them trapped inside. His voice remained calm, but exhaustion weighed heavily beneath every word. And now the door is open again. Suddenly the bridge around him shook violently. Crew members shouted warnings. One officer yelled, multiple breaches detected near the rupture edge. The commander turned briefly toward his crew before facing Earth one final time. If your governments still plan to fight each other after today, he said quietly, then none of you understand what's coming. The transmission ended. Seconds later, deep space sensors detected the impossible. The first creature crossed fully out of the void. Even the alien empire stopped firing. Across countless ships near Pluto, both human and alien crews watched the dark shape emerge slowly from the rupture. It was enormous, bigger than entire fleets, and it was heading toward the solar system. The creature moved through space without engines. That was the first thing everyone noticed. No fire, no visible propulsion. The enormous shape simply drifted forward from the void while waves of dark energy spread around it like smoke underwater. Even from millions of kilometers away, the thing looked massive enough to swallow entire cities. Across Earth, people watched emergency broadcasts in terrified silence. The alien empire stopped attacking. The returning human armada stopped advancing. For a brief moment, every fleet near Pluto seemed frozen by the same fear. Then the creature opened its center. A circular layer of pale light slowly expanded across its surface, glowing brighter and brighter until deep space sensors failed completely around it. 1 second later, 3 Imperial warships vanished. Not exploded. Vanished. No wreckage remained. No heat signatures. They simply disappeared from reality itself. Panic spread instantly through the alien formations. Large sections of the Imperial fleet broke formation and attempted retreat, but the creature continued moving toward them silently. Then more shapes appeared inside the void. Hundreds. The commander aboard the Vanguard flagship immediately transmitted new orders across all human frequencies. Do not engage individually. Fall back toward containment positions. His voice stayed calm, but everyone could hear the pressure behind it. The returning human fleet moved quickly, forming defensive lines between the creatures and the inner solar system. Their dark warships spread across space like a giant shield protecting Earth. Inside the underground command center on Earth, military leaders argued about evacuation plans while global communication systems barely continued functioning. Strange interference from the void now reached every corner of the planet. People reported hearing whispers in empty rooms. Electronic devices activated on their own. Some claimed they saw shadows moving where nobody stood. The signal officer knew things were getting worse faster than expected. The creatures were affecting reality itself. One exhausted technician approached him quietly. "Sir, we received a request from the Vanguard flagship." "What kind of request?" "They want you aboard." The room immediately reacted. Several officials objected at once. Some believed it was a trap. Others argued nobody should trust the ancient fleet after what they brought back from the void. But the signal officer already understood why the commander asked for him. He knew the old codes, the old systems, and most importantly, he still remembered humanity before the silence. Hours later, a small shuttle launched from Earth under heavy escort. As it climbed through the atmosphere, he looked down at the planet below. Cities glowed through clouds filled with emergency aircraft. Highways remained packed with fleeing civilians. Military checkpoints surrounded shelters while billions of people waited for answers nobody could give them. Earth looked fragile from orbit, small, unprepared, and somewhere beyond Pluto, something ancient was moving closer. The shuttle crossed through the remains of the Imperial blockade hours later. For the first time, he saw the true scale of the battle. Destroyed alien warships drifted everywhere. Some had been sliced clean in half. Others looked crushed inward like empty cans. Fires still burned across broken hulls spinning silently through space. But among the wreckage floated damaged human ships too. The Vanguard fleet had paid a price. Several ancient warships drifted without power while emergency crews struggled to repair them. Some vessels showed massive scars across their hulls as if clawed by something enormous. The shuttle finally approached the flagship. The vessel looked terrifying up close. It stretched across space like a black metal continent covered in weapons, armor, and old battle damage. Entire sections appeared rebuilt dozens of times over the years. Faded human markings still covered parts of the hull beneath newer layers of armor plating. The name Vanguard Eternity remained barely visible near the docking bay. As the shuttle landed, armed soldiers waited silently inside. Their uniforms looked human, but something about them felt different. Every face carried exhaustion. Some had mechanical replacements for missing limbs or eyes. Others moved like people who had spent years sleeping beside danger. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke unless necessary. The signal officer was escorted through dark corridors filled with red emergency lighting. Crew members rushed between stations while distant vibrations shook the ship every few minutes. The fleet was still fighting. Along the walls hung faded photographs of Earth. Old Earth. Families. Cities. Sunsets over oceans. The crew had carried memories of home for decades inside the void. Finally, the commander waited inside a war room overlooking deep space. Up close, he looked even older. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying 30 years of endless survival. "You came," the commander said quietly. "You asked." The commander gave a tired nod before turning toward the massive window ahead. Beyond it, distant battles flashed around Pluto. The creatures kept coming. The signal officer stood beside him silently for several seconds before finally asking the question that haunted everyone. "What are they?" The commander stayed quiet for a long time. Then he answered carefully. "We thought they were life forms once. We were wrong." He activated a holographic display showing recordings from inside the void. Ancient human stations drifted in darkness while strange energy waves moved through space. At first, they only watched us. Ships near the deeper regions began losing communication. Crews disappeared without signs of struggle. The footage changed. Dark shapes moved briefly through abandoned corridors. Then people started hearing voices. Dead relatives. Friends. Memories speaking back to them. The signal officer felt cold unease settle deeper inside him. "They get inside your mind," the commander continued. Fear makes it easier for them. Another image appeared. A human colony station completely dark. No bodies. No survivors. They don't invade worlds the way armies do, the commander said softly. They erase people slowly, piece by piece. Outside the war room, alarms suddenly echoed through the flagship again. An officer rushed inside. Imperial fleet requesting emergency coordination. The commander almost laughed. The Empire spent hours trying to enslave your world, he said. Now they're begging us for help. Moments later, a hologram of the alien emperor appeared in the center of the room. For the first time, fear showed openly on his face. Our outer fleets are collapsing, the emperor admitted immediately. Those entities bypass our shielding entirely. The commander crossed his arms. You opened the rupture wider when you arrived in this system. We did not know containment existed. That ignorance may kill every civilization in this galaxy. The emperor remained silent. The signal officer watched carefully, realizing how much had changed within a single day. Humanity and the Empire had gone from enemies to unwilling allies against something neither side fully understood. Then the emperor spoke again. What do you require? The commander's answer came instantly. Every available ship, every weapon, and complete withdrawal from Earth. The emperor hesitated only briefly before nodding. Agreed. The transmission ended. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the signal officer looked toward the commander. You really think we can stop them? The commander stared out toward the distant darkness. I think we can slow them. That answer felt worse. Hours later, combined human and Imperial fleets launched coordinated attacks around the edge of the void. Earth watched the battle live through damaged satellite feeds. Entire sections of space burned with weapons fire. The creatures moved silently through it all. Some ignored direct hits completely. Others broke apart into clouds of black fragments before reforming again moments later. But the Vanguard fleet knew how to fight them. Specialized weapons created waves of bright energy that temporarily forced the creatures backward. Massive containment fields spread between ships, limiting the expansion of the void itself. Still, the line kept falling apart. One Imperial cruiser vanished in front of millions watching from Earth. Another human destroyer drifted powerless after strange shadows spread across its hull. Then came the worst reports. Colonies near the outer solar system stopped responding entirely. Mining stations went silent. Emergency signals ended mid-transmission. The creatures were spreading faster now. Inside the flagship, exhausted crews continued preparing for one final operation. The signal officer watched soldiers recording personal messages for families long dead on Earth. Some crew members sat quietly staring at old photographs. Others simply kept working without emotion. One younger soldier finally asked him something softly. What's Earth like now? He paused. How could he explain 200 years of history to people who still remembered the world before it changed? It's still home, he answered finally. The soldier smiled faintly at that. Later, the commander revealed the truth about their final plan. A massive device buried deep inside the flagship could collapse the rupture permanently. But only from inside the void. The signal officer stared at him in disbelief. You're planning to go back in. We never planned to leave, the commander replied quietly. Outside the ship, more dark shapes emerged from the growing rupture. And this time they were heading directly toward Earth. The first creature reached the orbit of Neptune 12 hours later. Humanity watched the approach through damaged telescopes and military broadcasts that barely remained stable. The dark shape moved slowly through space, surrounded by waves of distortion that twisted nearby light into impossible patterns. Entire communication networks failed whenever it passed near satellites. People across Earth stopped sleeping. Cities stayed awake through the night while families crowded around televisions, radios, and emergency shelters waiting for updates from the front lines. Nobody cared about politics anymore. Nobody argued about surrender. The only thing that mattered now was survival. Near Neptune, combined human and Imperial fleets formed a massive defensive wall stretching across space. Thousands of warships waited in silence while weapons charged across their hulls. Then the creature entered firing range. The commander aboard the Vanguard Eternity gave the order calmly. Open fire. Light exploded across the darkness. Beams, missiles, and waves of energy crossed space together, striking the creature from every direction. The brightness became so intense that some broadcasts temporarily lost image feed completely. For several seconds, nobody could even see the target anymore. Then the light faded. The creature was still moving, damaged, but alive. A low silence spread across command stations throughout the solar system. The thing continued drifting forward while dark cracks slowly repaired themselves across its surface. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the void every minute. The battle had already begun to feel hopeless. Inside the Vanguard Eternity, the signal officer stood beside the commander watching fleet reports arrive one after another. Outer defense lines collapsing, Imperial cruisers lost, containment fields failing, and still the commander remained strangely calm. "You knew this would happen," the signal officer said quietly. The commander nodded once. "We learned a long time ago that these things can't truly be destroyed." "Then how did you survive against them for 30 years? The commander stared toward the battle outside. "We kept them trapped." Another violent tremor shook the flagship as nearby weapons fired again. Red emergency lights flashed across the bridge while exhausted crews moved between stations without panic. They had done this too many times before. The signal officer looked around the bridge carefully. Most of the crew members looked older than they should have. Not physically, emotionally. These people had spent decades fighting a war nobody on Earth even knew existed. One younger officer approached the commander quickly. "The Empire's left flank is collapsing. They're requesting immediate reinforcement." The commander barely reacted. "Send the 7th line." The officer hesitated. "That sector won't survive long enough to retreat." "I know." The younger officer lowered his head silently before leaving. The signal officer watched him go. "You're sacrificing them." The commander finally looked at him directly. "They volunteered for this mission 31 years ago. Every person on this ship already accepted they would never see home again." Those words stayed heavy in the room long after he finished speaking. Outside, the war spread deeper into the solar system. The creatures moved silently through fleets and stations alike, leaving destruction that made no sense to human minds. Some ships simply lost power and drifted lifelessly away. Others reported hearing voices before all communication stopped completely. Several Imperial crews abandoned their own vessels after suffering mental breakdowns from prolonged exposure near the creatures. Fear itself had become part of the battlefield. On Earth, strange events increased daily. People reported shared nightmares about endless dark oceans beneath the stars. Entire neighborhoods lost electricity for hours whenever new creatures emerged from the void. Some survivors claimed they saw moving shadows standing outside their homes at night. The signal officer understood the terrifying truth now. Distance no longer mattered. The longer the void remained open, the stronger the creatures became. Near Jupiter, one of the largest battles in human history erupted as combined fleets attempted to slow the advancing swarm. Millions watched live feeds showing ancient Vanguard warships fighting beside former enemy vessels from the Empire. Ships exploded across the darkness while enormous creatures drifted between them untouched by most weapons. Then the Vanguard fleet revealed its true power. Several ancient warships moved forward together, forming a giant circular formation around the approaching creatures. Bright lines of energy connected between the ships until a massive field surrounded the entire region of space. For the first time, the creatures stopped moving. The commander's voice echoed across every military channel. "Containment field active. All fleets retreat behind Line 3 immediately." Imperial commanders obeyed without argument. They had finally realized the returning human armada understood this enemy better than anyone else. But the containment only lasted minutes. Dark cracks spread through the glowing field while the creatures pushed against it from inside. Entire Vanguard ships began overheating from the pressure. One by one, their reactors started failing. The signal officer watched silently as warning icons appeared across the tactical map. "They're burning themselves out," he whispered. The commander nodded slowly. They always do. Then the first human ship detonated. The explosion lit space brighter than a star for several seconds. Nearby creatures recoiled slightly as fragments of the containment field collapsed outward. Another Vanguard vessel exploded moments later. Then another. The crews aboard those ships never attempted escape. They held the line until the end. Earth watched in silence. Even the alien empire stopped transmitting military propaganda or demands. Across countless worlds, billions now understood the same truth. Humanity's lost fleet had not abandoned the galaxy. They had protected it. Hours later, the commander finally gathered his senior officers inside the war room. The signal officer stood among them quietly while the final operation plans appeared across the holographic display. The flagship would enter the void directly. At its center rested the original rupture point where reality had first broken apart decades earlier. The massive device hidden inside the Vanguard Eternity could collapse the entire anomaly permanently. But activating it required manual detonation from within. No return. No rescue. Complete destruction. One officer asked the question everyone already knew. How long will the containment last after activation? The commander answered honestly. Maybe a few minutes. Silence followed. Nobody argued. Nobody tried to leave. The signal officer looked around the room at exhausted faces illuminated by hologram light. These people had already spent 30 years trapped in darkness fighting an endless war. And now they were preparing to die there. One older crew member finally smiled faintly. At least Earth survived long enough to become worth saving. A few quiet laughs spread through the room. Small. Tired. Human. The signal officer suddenly realized something painful. These soldiers no longer truly belonged to Earth. Time had moved on without them. Everyone they once loved was gone centuries ago. The only thing they had left was the mission. Later, the commander stood alone near the observation deck staring at distant stars. You could stay behind, he said quietly without turning around. The signal officer shook his head. Someone has to tell Earth the truth. The commander finally looked toward him. For years we believed humanity forgot us. We did. The honesty made the commander smile weakly. But you still came back, the signal officer added. The commander looked out toward the stars again. We made a promise. Final preparations began across the fleet. Remaining Imperial ships formed defensive positions around Earth while surviving Vanguard vessels escorted the flagship toward the void one last time. On Earth, people gathered outside despite government warnings. Millions looked up at the night sky watching distant flashes from the ongoing battle. For the first time in history, humanity stood united. Not by politics, not by fear, but by the realization that strangers had sacrificed everything to protect a world they would never return to. As the Vanguard Eternity approached the growing rupture, the creatures reacted violently. Massive dark forms surged toward the flagship while remaining human ships intercepted them in suicidal defensive attacks. One by one, ancient warships disappeared behind explosions and collapsing containment fields. Still, the flagship kept moving forward. Inside the bridge, alarms screamed continuously while systems failed across multiple decks. Crew members remained at their stations despite fires and hull breaches spreading throughout the vessel. The commander gave orders calmly through it all. Hold formation. Redirect power to containment. Protect the core. The signal officer gripped the nearest console as the ship entered the edge of the void once again. Outside the windows, reality itself seemed broken. Stars twisted unnaturally. Dark shapes moved through endless storms beneath the surface of space. And somewhere ahead waited the center of it all. The commander turned toward the bridge crew one final time. No speeches. No dramatic final words. Just quiet pride. You did well, he said softly. Many crew members smiled for the first time since returning to Earth. Then the flagship disappeared fully into the darkness. Back near Earth, every surviving fleet watched silently as the rupture began collapsing inward. At first it happened slowly, then faster. The giant black tear across space folded into itself while violent energy storms spread through the outer solar system. Remaining creatures twisted violently as the containment fields crushed them backward toward the closing anomaly. One final transmission escaped the darkness before the signal vanished forever. The commander's voice, calm to the very end. "Tell Earth, we held the line." Then the void closed,